Hello everyone, and welcome to the 37th plagiarized episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Bobby Kotick from Activision Blizzard, perhaps one of gaming's most despicable and evil leaders, who reigned as the tyrannical dictator of the company for far too long. And while he may have built Activision into a game development powerhouse, the cost of human life discarded to make the next Call of Duty game shows an utterly ruthless, heartless man, one whose ambitions overcame all, a disregard for other people's health for the goal of maximum profit, and how unhinged it got, where Kotick allowed countless abusers to run amok in his company for decades. It's a truly disgraceful, albeit tragic story, and unfortunately, there has been no recompense or justice served because despite his negligence, he has gotten away scot-free. So here is the complete story and the transgressions of Bobby Kotick. So let's begin. Bobby Kotick was the CEO of Activision from 1991 to 2023. That's over a quarter-century reign. That's a full 3 years longer than how many years Joseph Stalin was leader of the Soviet Union, until his death in 1953. Both men's reigns, unfortunately, are completely irreversible. While Joseph Stalin can be blamed for repression, war crimes, and the mass famine known as the Holodomor, Bobby Kotick may just be his gaming counterpart. Even before the biggest controversy of them all, Bobby Kotick was known for barbaric and relentless conditions with all the studios under his watch. For example, a few years before the California lawsuit that exposed a lot of things, Call of Duty Black Ops 4 was revealed to have a gigantic human toll on the developers. Testers were treated like second-class citizens, and the game's development cycle of around 3 years was extremely short for the scale of the game, and crunch was prevalent. There was basically employee-based segregation between core team members, with testers treated as inferior, just because they weren't full-time employees. Now, with that being said, Bobby Kotick is of course responsible for all of this, as he absolutely had the power to change how Treyarch operated. But as you'll see as a common theme throughout all of this, he did absolutely nothing. This leads us to July of 2021, when it was publicly exposed that Activision Blizzard was being taken to court in California over harassment of employees, specifically women. As the initial reports read, the company was described as having a workplace culture similar to that of frat boys, with practices such as cube crawls, a self-named action in which male employees would crawl into cubicles around the office and target women. There's also the fact that women would literally be held back from promotions because of their gender, and the fact that they might become pregnant, and Activision didn't feel like supporting up-and-coming potential mothers. And so no support for you. You're staying at the ground floor. As petty as it sounds, it was done for one key reason: saving money. And it didn't matter that Activision made so much a year and could afford to support female employees on the most basic level, that they'd rather hold them back. And I imagine that it would be tremendously difficult for women to rise through the ranks. So that being said, there was a swift backlash towards the company once this was all made public. The number one most desired action to be taken was for Bobby Kotick to resign and give the torch to someone else. And as most people familiar with this story will know, Bobby refused. At least not without some sort of benefit to himself. That didn't stop him from throwing other people under the bus to save his own skin. One such case being the departure of J. Allen Brack, the president of the Blizzard side of Activision Blizzard. It's commonly agreed that Brack's departure was Bobby Kotick throwing a bone at disgruntled gamers in an attempt of self-preservation. Yeah, let's fire J. Allen Brack, and people will think the monster is gone. Needless to say, while Brack's retirement was well deserved, given his own negligence, people did not for a second look away from Bobby Kotick. It's well known at this point that Bobby Kotick was fully aware of the frat boy culture and did nothing to stop it. In fact, he was so guilty that he and other Activision higher-ups actually tried to destroy evidence by shredding documents that Bobby and his associates knew would make them look extra bad. And that shows a lack of remorse on Bobby Kotick's part. that he was willing to allow incriminating evidence to be destroyed rather than come clean about his failure to protect his employees. In fact, Bobby Kotick is guilty of abuse directly in his own regard. In one instance, he directly threatened an employee, telling said employee that he would destroy them. There is also the case of him firing a flight attendant on his private jet after one of the pilots harassed them. He fired the victim, in other words. Bobby Kotick, in response to the backlash, typically pretended like he did nothing wrong. In his emails to employees, he had the gall to say that they were all facing the lawsuit together, and in general pretending like he has a zero-tolerance policy for abuse, despite everything he was proven negligent for. Bobby Kotick refused to step down from Activision Blizzard, and in fact, his move to sell Activision Blizzard to Microsoft was pretty much a last-ditch attempt to make a lot of money from an acquisition, and also do damage control. Perhaps Bobby's most pathetic attempt at damage control, however, is when Activision Blizzard investigated themselves and concluded they weren't guilty. This was obviously met with overwhelming ridicule, and people made memes about it while the backlash only increased. Now, the biggest reason Bobby Kotick qualifies for analyzing evil is his genuinely evil negligence, allowing sexual harassment to go on at his company for decades. But there's also Activision's business practices to a lesser extent. Call of Duty became a cash cow throughout the years. Controversies include many ways they've sold microtransactions, trying to rip people off in the Modern Warfare remaster, by charging money for DLC maps, again, in a remaster, PlayStation exclusivity deals, etc. That's just Call of Duty though. Let's not forget other disasters like Warcraft 3 Reforged, which was panned as a remaster of a classic game, and the release of Overwatch 2 was pretty much just a patch rather than a true sequel. Activision Blizzard became one of the gaming industry's greediest publishers, second only to Electronic Arts, and it can all be blamed at the one who used to be steering the ship as its captain. Bobby Kotick, even before he was caught, didn't care for anyone or anything. He saw players as pretty expendable in his own right. His goal was to acquire as much money as possible. And the unfortunate thing is that it worked. Bobby Kotick was CEO of Activision Blizzard for decades, as mentioned before. Activision pretty much got to where it was, for better or worse, because of Bobby Kotick. As greedy as Activision as a company was, it made money. And only in the past couple of years did we learn the human toll. And how many corners Bobby Kotick was really cutting. Bobby really did everything to make as much money as possible. That's why he never improved safety standards. It's why he rejected female employee promotions if it meant making more money. You can see that all Bobby Kotick was motivated by was money, and he considered this acceptable, whatever the cost. It's also fair to say that Bobby Kotick is a karma Houdini, as despite the fact that he should be in prison, he isn't, and in fact got a golden parachute through his acquisition from Microsoft, so he still gained something through the acquisition. You might also notice that the acquisition actually benefited him over simply resigning. You see, if he resigned from Activision Blizzard, he wouldn't make any more money, but by selling to Microsoft, he would at least get a load of money through an acquisition, even if he was let go. So you can tell that he did damage control in the most self-advantageous way possible. He basically did it so he could look like he was saving the company, when really it was completely self-serving. There isn't really much to say about Bobby Kotick after that. You can see that all that he's been motivated by is his own colossal greed. And this was reflected through running one of the greediest game publishers on the planet. The reason why the Microsoft acquisition was received so well was because there was hope that they could save Activision. So far, it hasn't panned out well at all, given they've just been closing studios and laying people off, but the hope was at least expressed. Bobby Kotick, in my opinion, should be in prison, but I doubt he ever will be. He got away with all his crimes, and aside from a now universal hatred from everyone, he has more than enough money to stave off the backlash. This guy is worth billions. He doesn't deserve his wealth, and he doesn't deserve to be a free man. But that's the reality of the world we live in. some of the worst people have monopolistic control over many. Whether it be dictators, serial killers, or even greedy business executives, they are all self-centered evils, and Bobby Kotick is no exception. Thank you for listening to this episode of Analyzing Evil. What do you think of Bobby Kotick? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'm Ginger Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?